I have watched nearly 333 anime, and I've found myself disappointed with most horror anime. It's rare to see a show that can get under your skin, so many people go out of their way to say anime as a medium can't be scary. But I'm gonna tell you about some which have genuinely managed to unnerve me, which, with horror flicks being practically a personality trait of mine, is a hard thing to accomplish. Some of these anime I'm about to talk about don't manage to leave my mind completely, and I find myself thinking about them more than any live-action horror movie. I'd like to preface that these anime aren't exactly all horror. Some are psychological, others are thrillers, some are suspenseful, stuff of that nature, but it did manage to scare me nonetheless. So to start off, I'd like to give 3 honorable mentions, the first being the upcoming Uzumaki, the Junji Ito adaptation. This video is being made in September of 2023, and as of right now, Uzumaki's adaptation doesn't have a release date. However, it's undeniable how good this anime looks, so I'm sure once it drops, it will certainly become a horror classic. Next is The Promised Neverland. The first season was a phenomenal horror story, but yeah, we all know what happened after that. And the last one is Higurashi. Yeah, this might be a shocker to some longtime viewers of mine, considering I've made many videos on this series. Higurashi is undoubtedly an anime that I love, but I wouldn't personally call it scary. Due to its age and art style, some moments in the series come off more as goofy than unnerving. Most of the series I personally find awesome and entertaining, which I'm not exactly sure was the intent. However, this doesn't diminish the fact that it is a phenomenal series. I would normally recommend it because the story is great, but for the purposes of this video, it never really managed to get under my skin like the shows that I'm about to talk about. Satoshi Kon is a legendary director in the anime community, known for his works like Paranoia Agent and Paprika. While both are unnerving to a degree, neither of them hold a candle to his magnum opus, Perfect Blue. Mima Kuroge leaves her idol group Cham to fully pursue a career in acting. However, the switch in the direction of her career path ends up being very taxing for her, as studios begin to ask her for things she isn't exactly comfortable with, while she's being stalked by a fan who cannot move past her idol error and stumbles upon a site claiming to be her and somehow knowing how she lives her everyday life down to a minute detail. All of these factors lead her to gradually lose her sanity, as she begins to be unable to tell the difference between what's real and what isn't. Perfect Blue is a psychological thriller that leaves you with a lot to think about throughout the film, and even more so when the credits roll. When I watched it, one thing I picked up pretty quickly because of me doing YouTube is themes of identity and alter egos. Where is the line drawn between you and who you present yourself to be online? It's a dive into celebrity and creator culture and showing the risks of creating parasocial relationships with those that idolize you. We get to see how much someone could risk to become who they want to be, how much they're willing to sacrifice or damage their image to attain fame, what pressure from the people around you and their expectations can do to someone's mental state. There is a lot to appreciate in this movie from an analytical standpoint, which is something I love to do, but also a lot from a filmmaking standpoint as well. There's a great juxtaposition between Mima and her delusions, and the use of color is perfect, with red being symbolic for her ever-depleting mental state. The framing is also stellar. It's no wonder critically acclaimed movies like Requiem for a Dream pays homage to scenes from this movie, and in a movie like Black Swan's case, they just recreate the entire movie because it's just that influential and that perfect. And of course, it's unnerving. I know for certain that many of the sequences in this movie haunt my mind, such as the scene in the parking garage. The build-up and tension in it is unmatched. I watched this movie in theaters a month ago with my girlfriend, and the atmosphere of fear in that theater was so thick you could probably cut it. There were many points in that theater that people were gasping. One of the reasons I'd argue the tension building and sense of horror is so strong is because of the sound design. The use of sound helps to create an atmosphere that has you on edge as Mima loses sight of what is real. The editing makes you feel the distortion of reality that she must be feeling as the movie progresses, and some of the shots in this film are fairly grotesque for modern anime standards. Again, going back to the scene in the parking garage. And another scene I can't talk about because then we'd be teetering into spoilers. With how dark this film is, Naturally, there are content warnings that I would suggest you look into before you indulge in this film. A major topic addressed in this film is sexual violence, so please look into the movie if you have triggers before watching it. I would honestly recommend doing that for most of the things in this list, because I'm not going to be able to accurately convey all of the things that could be triggering in these. Perfect Blue is a movie I believe to be a masterpiece, and despite being 25 years old, only seems to become more relevant in internet culture every passing year, as its themes could be applied to both content creators and social influencers. This film is one I doubt will leave my mind entirely, and I'm sure will shake some of you to your core. This entry will surprise many of you. It may even make some of you click off of this video, but ReZero is a show that I personally classify as a fantasy psychological thriller series. I will die on this hill, just like I will fight that 2001 A Space Odyssey is a cosmic horror movie, but that's a video for another day. I love ReZero. It's near and dear to my heart. There are many scenes that deeply resonate with me and can make me sob, but damn did some shit in this fucking show scare me. While stepping out of a convenience store, Natsuki Subaru finds himself transported to another world in the blink of an eye. Thinking he must have been brought here for some greater purpose or that he must be really strong, he finds that he seemingly has no powers whatsoever. In this world, he meets a girl named Amelia who he falls in love with at first sight, and as he spends the day with her, they are both brutally murdered. To his surprise though, he awakes perfectly fine at a point he was at earlier that day, and when he meets Amelia, she has no idea who he is. Subaru finds out that he does have a power, but it's not one he wants. He has the ability to return by death, meaning that when he dies, he is taken back to a random point in time, which he calls a checkpoint. With this newfound power he has, he sets out to find out why he has been brought to this world and what secrets this world has, as well as explore his feelings for Amelia. I'm going to try my best to not spoil much about this series at all, because of all of the ones I'm going to talk about here in this video, I think this one is really hard to talk about why it's scary without spoiling a lot of the show. The grounds for the horrific scenes that can play out in ReZero are as anyone would expect, oftentimes directly related to his ability to return by death. Subaru dies, and he dies a lot. Sometimes in normal ways, sometimes in horrifically awful ways. Not only does he die a lot, his power prohibits him from talking to anyone about it, so he has to experience all of his deaths completely alone. Subaru is a fantastic character, and I love him to bits, so naturally I feel the need to root for him, which makes it so extremely soul-crushing to see how some of his deaths go down. This leads to lashing out, severe depression and trauma, and in some instances just giving up completely, which, speaking of that, I've already made a video on this episode, but the episode Outside of Madness was the first of many that not only scared the shit out of me, but made me insanely emotional. The stuff he goes through is straight up nightmare fuel. This episode is one of many episodes and moments that will stick with you for a very long time. Not to mention the world he's in, Lagunica, is the most batshit place ever. There are so many things and entities that could just bring about world destruction seemingly whenever they want to, and sometimes it happens. There are super evil cults, rabbits, eldritch creatures, and manipulative individuals with high levels of power that can make the landscape of Lagunica hellish. There are many isekai worlds I think would be super cool to be a part of, but hell nah, keep me away from ReZero's world. And I think one of the most effective and horrific parts about ReZero is that sometimes saving people is impossible. There are people you can love with all of your heart and be so attached to, and you will have to sit there and witness them die over and over again, and feel so powerless because sometimes you don't really think you can do anything. And that sucks. That is horrible. That is a reality I could not even fathom, and one that I would never want to personally have to go through, because I love my friends, I love my girlfriend, I love my family, and the last thing I want to do is be stuck in a cycle where I just see them repeatedly dying. That's scary. I love ReZero. I've watched all of the show through and through 3 times, and each time some of the scenes in it never get easier. In most cases, I can never stop thinking about the events that transpire in it. The series has left a long-lasting impact on me, both for its horrific contents and for its rich characters and their emotional journeys. Now, despite how colorful this series may appear on its surface, the anthology series Mononoke is dark and visually disturbing. During feudal Japan, a medicine seller travels from town to town in search of beings called Mononoke, not to be confused with the princess from the Ghibli movies. Once he's located them, he must learn the form of the spirit, the truth behind how it came to be, and the reason it lingers before he can exorcise it. We journey with him to various locations, finding out very little about who he is, but a lot about what Mononoke are, and how terrifying they can be. One of the series' strongest assets is its animation and visual aesthetics, as it both plays into its appeal and why I found it to be scary. The entirety of this Toei product is hand-drawn, capturing the art style of ukiyo-e from the Edo period of Japan. These are prints and paintings that were meant to capture the quote-unquote floating world, or pretty much everyday life as a whole. The ukiyo-e style has flourishing colors and almost a decorative feel to it, and since this style is from the 17th century, the end result is an anime that feels grainy, as if it was made using old pieces of parchment, and unforgettable scenes because of its vivid coloring, stylized characters, and attention to detail in backgrounds. This art style is perfect for Mononoke in 3 ways. 1. Ukiyo-e works tend to capture a surreality to it that makes its audience feel as if they're in a state between nightmares, dreams, and reality, something Mononoke very much emulates. This show, as mentioned earlier, takes place in feudal Japan, and due to its ukiyo-e inspiration, it almost feels like a historical piece, like watching history in motion. 3. The horror presented from this anime ends up being very visceral. Another thing that adds to not only the visual charm, but also the way the story unfolds is its inspiration from kabuki. Kabuki is traditional Japanese theater, combining both performance and traditional dances. The music and sound effects that tend to play throughout scenes, with crucial moments being synchronized to hit a certain instrument like the kagura suzu, which is a type of bell and is heard a lot throughout the show, is very obviously taken from kabuki-style theater, and I think it really works to elevate the horror. The combination of these two Japanese traditional art forms brings forth an absolutely underrated anime, and one that managed to scare time and time again. Here, what Mononoke borrows from ukiyo-e and kabuki elevates its contents to new levels. There are a lot of moments in the show that made my skin crawl, and some even found their way into my nightmares. I've legit had some very spooky dreams after watching certain episodes, like these stupid little fucking babies. God, I hate these fuckers. The colors lure you into a false sense of security, much like some of the spirits in the show do. Due to the show's visual aesthetics, when things actually start to hit the fan, it feels hyper surreal, as if you are experiencing an out-of-body or nightmarish type dream. This makes things like body horror and the Mononoke way more scary because it feels like you're having a very bad high trip. The direction utilizes kabuki in a way that makes what's playing out on screen feels as if it's flowing together seamlessly, but it's simultaneously disjointed. You never have a chance to truly relax because things are coming at you from every angle imaginable. Sometimes the story isn't linear too, which these elements when paired with the animation that is clearly trying to relax you creates an extreme sense of anxiety for the viewer, which is perfect. The Mononoke themselves are also very cool. They're all super different with layered stories to them. With it being an anthology series, the story isn't overarching and can lead to some characters not being fully realized, but that's okay because I feel like it makes up for this in every other department. Mononoke is a show I found while working on this video, and I'm so happy that I did. This is the pinnacle of what horror anime should strive to be. All of the horror was super effective and clearly had thought put into its direction. The animation and art design is so experimental that it will stick with you for a while after viewing. If you haven't seen it yet, please do. Mononoke is very worth the watch. While Serial Experiments Lane is spooky in its own right, I wanted to talk about one of the team's other projects for this video. Initially, I was going to talk about Ghost Town, a series I found myself enjoying a bit, but that changed when I discovered Texhnolyze. In a grim, dark city named Lux, people are forced to mine a substance called raffia, which is then used to make up Texhnolyze, transplants that let people replace their body parts and ligaments with cybernetics. These people were often used to conduct research by a higher class, but this balance is disturbed when a series of crimes break out. Ichise, an ex-boxer who lost some limbs from these gangs, and Ran, a florist who is clairvoyant, find themselves right in the middle of the hell that's breaking out in Lux. This show is the Skinamarink of anime, for those that know what that movie is. By that, I mean that this is by no means accessible. This show is incredibly slow and very, very dreadful and bleak. There are many shots of hallways, random objects such as dolls, and prolonged takes of characters breathing. Most of the first episode is actually just grunting and breathing. There is very little dialogue in it. While I absolutely loved Skinamarink, Texhnolyze is one of the most dreadful experiences I can think of experiencing in regards to anime. This show is very painful to watch. I had to take multiple breaks while watching just the first few episodes, and I feel that it only gets worse as the show goes on until you find out exactly what it's trying to say. Body horror, horrid depictions of violence and gore, cults and spiritualist groups, and so many factors in the city of Lux come together to make you feel disgusting just for watching it. The city itself comes to life and becomes a character. The lack of saturation and the pain of the people living in it make a bleak atmosphere. Serial Experiments Lane managed to pack a lot into 13 episodes, but with Texhnolyze being 22 episodes, it's able to further develop its ideas that it presents. There are a lot of philosophical ideas and themes present in the series. Rand, the clairvoyant, sees a future about their town falling apart and humanity ceasing to exist. This creates a clash of ideas for whether this future should be carried out, or whether a predetermined future can be changed. An exploration of fatalism, if you will, whether humans have control over the future or whether they lack free will. This also feeds into a sense of nihilism, as most of the people in Lux have given up hope in life and are waiting to die. The show also, much like Lane, is littered with Nietzsche's idea of Übermensch, which boils down to being an ideal figure for humanity to strive to be. Humans are presented with the ability to enhance their bodies via cybernetics and could theoretically become perfect beings. This concept of transhumanism is present in most of the show, as we are always asked whether this technology can better humanity or be used to surpass what it means to be human. There are so many more ideas present in this series that I can't even begin to mention them all. Nor did I probably pick up on all of them, which I'm not sure that I ever will. Texhnolyze is a show I don't know if I really plan to revisit, purely because of how painful and terrifying a viewing experience it was. The dread of the city, its people, and the scenarios they're placed in is infectious in all of the worst ways. The scariest part about this series, though, in my opinion, is humanity. You can see how cold people are. Like in this scene, Ichise is left behind in a staircase after losing his limbs. That person that walks past him has no sympathy for humanity. And I think the reason that is so terrifying is because it's very realistic. I feel like I could see something like this happening in New York, for example, or even your everyday city. Humans are really terrible, especially in the later half of the series, and it's an uncomfortable reality that I did not really want to face, and one that I probably don't want to think about any longer. Now this next one will either surprise many of you or will give you a new show to watch, as you might not have heard of it. This show I'm talking about is the psychological drama Aku no Hana, or Flowers of Evil, which is a show directed by Hiroshi Nagahama, the same director of the upcoming Uzumaki series. Takao Kasuga is fascinated by poetry, mainly Baudelaire's Flower of Evil, which I found is a real piece of literature, but his fascination for poetry trails into his admiration for one of his classmates, Nanako Saiki. He has a gigantic crush on her, and upon returning to school one day to pick up a book he left, he finds her gym clothes. He decides to steal them, and while stealing them is caught by Sawa Nakamura, a social outcast in his class. She uses this as blackmail, forcing him to act out disturbing fantasies and games of hers, or else she will tell everyone what he did. Now I'm sure one question popped into your head immediately as these clips started and have been playing in the background. What's going on with the animation? Flowers of Evil was the first series, and to my knowledge the only anime, to be completely rotoscoped. Rotoscoped meaning that real-life footage was filmed first and then traced over with hand-drawn animation. For a long time, the series has been bashed or looked over for its animation, but to me, I believe rotoscope animation to actually be the perfect choice for this series, as it embodies the vibe it's going for perfectly. You are placed in deep, very real and uncomfortable scenarios throughout the runtime of the show, so the animation really helps play into this. The way the characters walk, the way they talk, the way they express emotions, it makes them all feel human, but it also creates this uncanny valley feeling to them. This makes the unnerving scenes even more unnerving, but the emotional scenes surprisingly more relatable. Before watching this series, I'm not sure I'd seen an anime that was as immersive as Flowers of Evil. The environment is established with surreal animation and is built upon by the sound design, the camera angles and tracking, and the voice acting. First, the voice acting. The emotion displayed from the cast are all raw. When they yell, you feel the tension in the air that must have been in there during the recording room, and their breathing during normal dialogue was not cut, which adds to this weird sense of humanity to them. Not to mention the way they talk isn't exaggerated like how it normally is in anime. It's very calm, again feeding into the sense of realism. The next part, the environment building element, which really stuck with me while watching, is the cinematography. A lot of the anime uses long takes, meaning that the shot of the character goes on for a long time before cutting. It reminds me a lot of Halloween in this sense, as after Michael escapes, we see a lot of long takes of characters walking. The long takes typically feature Kasuga, usually just him actually, and most of the time it's him walking in the city. This conveys two things. One, everyone else appears bigger than him, showing that he is essentially powerless in the situation he's placed in. Two, that someone could be watching him. The long takes are distant, and they linger for quite a while, making you feel as if you are not the only one watching him. Again, feeling a lot like Halloween, this sense of being stalked. The show also utilizes a lot of close-ups, which are as they sound. Shots close-up of the character. This is where the choice to rotoscope I feel really pays off, because the way the character's faces move is just so unnatural. I couldn't look at the screen for a long time when we had close-ups due to how uncomfortable they made me feel. The next element, the sound design. There is essentially no soundtrack to this show. Instead, Flowers of Evil is full of ambience. The uncomfortable silence of a classroom, water flowing in a river, footsteps that feel as if they could be out your door, or the rustling of clothing behind your chair. The sound design is effective, honestly maybe too effective during tense scenes. There are only really two songs that come to mind that are featured in this soundtrack. One of which plays during a scene in a classroom that honestly has become a soundtrack I listen to a lot because it is such an effective song, and the other is the outro. It plays every episode before the credits roll, kind of similar to that of a season finale. Yeah, it sounds pretty creepy, right? Flowers of Evil reminds me a lot of Goodnight Poon Poon in the sense that it showcases realistic everyday life, but with the darker sides of humanity. There's nothing paranormal, no monsters or creatures, no gore. Everything that happens is all inside the characters' minds. It's all psychological. Flowers of Evil takes its time unraveling the story after his despicable action. Takao argues that he's innocent, but is he really that innocent? Or is there something more sinister sprouting inside of him? Whether he realizes it or not, he's having deep-rooted trauma created in him that will stick with him for a very long time because of Nakamura's actions. This establishes a moral question. Who is in the wrong here? Nakamura for making Kasuga do these things, or Kasuga for stealing the uniform and following through with Nakamura's orders anyways? Kasuga's actions act almost as a cautionary tale to not act on impulse, as doing so has put him on a slippery slope into the mind of Nakamura, who, speaking of, Sawa Nakamura is probably one of the most accurate depictions of a sociopath in anime that I have ever seen. Next to maybe a character from Inuyashiki. It is nearly impossible to read what is going on in her head, as sometimes her actions are cold and calculated, while other times she is impulsive and acts irrationally. She has no real care for human emotion. In fact, she doesn't even seem to really think like most people would. Nakamura feeds off embarrassment or negative emotions, making her gleam or blush whenever something horrid is happening to the people around her. She's openly rude to other classmates and teachers. She clearly lacks remorse in her punishment game with Kasuga. Her intentions almost feel unclear, but oddly enough you get a sense of what it is she really wants. Nakamura is the reason I found this show scary at points because of how unpredictable and how manipulative she is. And honestly, how realistic her character is. Most people that watch Flowers of Evil know someone almost exactly like Nakamura in their life. We've all met the manipulative type, or someone who doesn't seem to care for human emotions, and this makes her even more terrifying because we know these people actually exist. I will warn you that its ending pretty much exclusively hints and foreshadows future events with no context, and this is labeled as Part 1. However, it has been 10 years since this show came out, and it's really unfortunate to say that it's highly unlikely it will continue due to its initial poor reception. Flowers of Evil is an underrated gem that managed to get under my skin a surprising amount of times, and one that I would argue is one of the effective series in this video. Will it scare everyone? No. Matter of fact, I don't imagine it to scare many people at all. It definitely has much more of a psychological feel to it, but its horror aspects are undeniable and certainly frightened me at some points. I do mean that though, that some parts of it are disturbing and scary because while the anime does indeed have a very unsettling feel to it, the longer it ran, the more it morphed into a tragically beautiful story. Flowers of Evil is methodical, gritty, and extremely emotional at times, and very much a slow burn of a show. But for anyone that is patient and can buy into its animation, I think it has a lot to reward its audience with. Who knows? Maybe if we get enough people talking about it, a second season will come. And those were some anime that really shook me to my core, whether they're necessarily horror or not. I hope that with Uzumaki we continue to get more and better horror adaptations, and stay on the lookout for deeper analysis in the future of some of the series mentioned in this video, such as Flowers of Evil. It is a series I have a lot to say about, and I really couldn't fit it all into this video. Make sure to watch them, form your own opinions, and let me know what you think of them down below. And of course, a huge thank you to my patrons Ray, Jim, and Joshua. The fact that you guys have never ceased supporting me on Patreon despite my large gaps in uploads means the world to me, and it's the reason I was able to bring you a video like this. Happy Halloween, everyone. I hope you make the most of it, and I hope you have a great rest of your year.